Welcome to New England Lacrosse Journal's Chasing the Goal podcast, your source for all things lacrosse. I'm your host, Kyle Devitt. Alongside me, it's official. We made it official today. It's a new co-host, Mr. Owen Hart.
How's it going?
Hey, all right. Shaking hand. I thought we were going to do this. Let's do this.
Sure. Is that better? Good. Feel better?
That was a handshake and a fist bump for the listeners. Owen, let's... We're kind of in that weird stage right now where it's not quite lacrosse time, but the demand for lacrosse stuff is on the horizon. You just finished up a bunch of fall ball pieces at laxjournal.com.
Yep.
Are you ready?
Yes. I hate that the high school season ends and then it's just summer and there's no sports on at all except for the PLL. And then that's where all my lacrosse fixing is. And then once the fall starts again, you got basketball, football, everything's there. And everything's kind of died down my lacrosse things. And then once about New Year's hit, I'm ready for lacrosse again. And right now I'm getting back into it. So yeah. I'm really, really, really excited.
We're shifting up. And to that point, our guest, the new head coach at Middlesex, Brian Powers. Coach, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think, we were talking before we started recording that, you played at Tufts fairly recently. I believe you graduated in 19.
That's correct.
No. Yeah. So, and you're an alum from Middlesex, right? You graduated in 15.
Yeah.
And I was saying, I think I voted for you for an All-American spot in Division III when you were playing for Tufts. You decided to stay local. You coached at CM for a little bit. Can you kind of just talk me through your background in the sport and in New England?
Yeah, so grew up in Winchester, so I've kind of been around my whole life. Going to Middlesex was actually further away than going to Tufts because Tufts was like 4 miles. So started playing lacrosse in 8th grade. One of my best friends' dad kind of coached in Winchester youth and got me into it after I loved baseball growing up, but elbow started to have some trouble. And then I was a guy that loved running around. So lacrosse was a natural transition there. Wasn't somebody that was really looking at prep schools coming from Winchester. Loved kind of my friends there and wound up with my older sister going to Middlesex, getting a closer look at the school. The campus kind of brought me in and wound up going there for all 4 years, playing for Ned Herter and also for Doug Worthen and Jeff Cohane, who were the assistant coaches. Ned, longtime head coach. And then obviously that transition happened with Doug and after my 4 years at Tufts, I got a master's there and coached in 2020 for all 4 games, went undefeated. Wish that went a little bit longer, but after that, I knew I kind of wanted to be a teacher and a coach and always had my eyes set on Middlesex. Going to CM was an awesome experience. I absolutely loved it there and was able to follow in the shoes of another Tufts alum as well, Matt Callahan, who it was nice and kind of an easy transition there where we spoke the same language from Tufts. We were all trying to instill the same thing. So that was a really smooth transition. And then obviously when Doug Worthen kind of saw that he was making a transition in his life and Middlesex was something that became a possibility. It was something that, was always a goal for me, probably from my freshman year of college on. So definitely really grateful to be able to have this opportunity and kind of follow in the shoes of some of my biggest role models.
You mentioned growing up in Winchester. I think every town, they have a certain identity that they really kind of abide by. But I think it's really true in Winchester. Those kids play a certain way. They're tough, they're physical, they're mean, they're blue collar. Just talk about a little bit about growing up and how Winchester style of lacrosse a little bit. It was. I know you didn't play there, but you played like a Winchester kid, I'll say.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just we absolutely loved getting out there and on the field with each other and having the opportunity to kind of bash into each other a little bit. I was a hockey guy growing up, and a lot of those guys played hockey and lacrosse and football. So it was that physicality piece and just the love of the game. I think we were all really close knit as we were growing up through middle school, going to McCall, and it was always kind of an opportunity to get out there and have a lot of fun. And for us, that meant playing physical, playing hard, and usually getting the knuckles a little bit dirty. So definitely love that. And Winchester Youth Lacrosse was something that obviously it got me into the game. So I owe a lot to them.
I do feel like Winchester is one of those towns similar to,
don't say it.
It's similar to Westwood, where the ISL schools are getting a lot of great talent out of there. Guys are still staying and playing.
Yeah.
Now that you're in a position where players are coming in from different parts of Massachusetts to Middlesex, how much of a transition was that from coaching at CM, especially in this off season? What's that process like for you? What's it like in admissions, and how does it tie into you being a teacher?
Yeah. So the great thing about just me being a teacher is my availability on campus. And when kids are in for their tours and everything, I'm able to kind of stop by and say hello to the families, say hello to the kids, and get to know them a little bit, which is obviously kind of the point. I think that the best thing about this school is the availability of the faculty on a day-to-day basis to be super high visibility, to offer kids help, and just to kind of get to know the kids beyond being a teacher that's giving them homework. I think that when that's the case with the relationship, it's not necessarily the best foundation, but being able to see the faculty like cheering you on at your hockey games and at your soccer games and football and everything. You see them and just interacting with their families, having their dogs on campus, stuff like that. It really creates an environment that the kids understand that the teachers are more than just teachers, that they're kind of people that are on their side and rooting for them, as opposed to people that just give them grades and homework. So I think that's something that's awesome. And then one of the differences between CM and Middlesex is 70% boarding. So we can draw from a little bit further out with kids that are considering boarding as opposed to day. From Winchester, it's like 50-50. I was a day student, as was my older sister, my little sister. All three of us went to Middlesex. My little sister boarded. So it kind of depends on where you're from and if you don't mind driving. I've always enjoyed the commute, so that's something that I don't really mind. But yeah, definitely some differences.
Just going back to playing at Tufts and then ultimately becoming a graduate assistant, how hard was it, do you feel like, from transitioning from player to coach and then coaching people that you shared the field with not even a year ago? I had that when I first came back to Westwood to coach. I was coaching against people that were on the same team as me when I was a senior. And I thought that it was a little bit of a weird adjustment, kind of like having those kids like listen to you in a term of authoritarian role. Like, how did you deal with that? Was there any sort of a curve you had to deal with? Like, what was it like?
Yeah, I think one of the nice things about NESCAC lacrosse is, and kind of similar to the ISL, is that coaches can't be involved in the fall. So as you go through with the defensemen at Tufts, we would always have chalk talk sessions where we'd get guys in at a couple different times throughout the week or throughout the day. So the upperclassmen and the guys that played a little bit more earlier in their careers would often be leading those sessions. So you kind of get to bridge that gap slowly throughout the 4 years that you're there, and you start to understand, like, what does it mean to kind of run a room? How do you make a productive session, even amongst your best friends? So that's one way that I think as you go through your years at D3 schools in particular, you start to take on more of a leadership role. And with that, the transition's a little bit easier, I think, where you kind of understand that when you're trying to be productive and need to get something done and kind of be in that position of authority, it's something that you build up a little bit over time, especially just with the leadership positions in the fall that guys have. And then it was a fun process. And one of the cool things about Tufts is that we've had so many alums that have come back and coached. So it was kind of the standard and the norm. For example, after Daly left and Donalfo came in, the two assistant coaches were two guys that were 2016 grads, John Sachs and John Upgren, who were in that position where they'd just been with us the year before, and now they're our coaches. So the precedent had been set over time. Same thing with Callahan, Schoenhut, all of those guys. Kerwin, I'm sure, same transition when he was there. That was the standard. So I think that the team kind of understood how that developed. And so that was the norm. It made it a little bit easier, but that transition was definitely helpful for me becoming a young teacher and coach, and kind of setting those boundaries intentionally in the classroom and on the field, and being able to kind of create productive environments.
I always think it's interesting when we have someone on that is a coach and a teacher, because I think people that aren't in the education space or the coaching space think it's the same. And I will tell you, my experience is vastly different. I was a full-time sub, so that's a little less teachery, I think, but I was at a school for a long period of time and I hated it. And I didn't understand why my coaching ability at that time, and I was younger, didn't translate at all. So I'm sure you didn't find that as challenging as I did, but can you kind of see what I'm saying? What are the main differences in how you approach, let's say, a rowdy classroom versus a rowdy group before practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about channeling the energy. So I think in that way, it's similar in that you're trying to achieve the same goals, and similar in that you're trying to set like clear boundaries and parameters for how a space is supposed to operate. from the classroom perspective, that energy is something that I love. Like I'd much rather have a group come in and be a little bit boisterous, a little bit loud, and like have energy going into the class that you can then dial back and kind of refine and focus. And same thing from a lacrosse perspective. Like I love that energy. That's the thing that I try to most bring when I'm coaching a practice. And in the classroom, if I'm the one that doesn't have to bring the energy and kind of be performative and get the kids engaged, I love that. But it's definitely more productive in a classroom to dial that back sometimes and make sure that the loudest voices aren't the ones that are necessarily dominating the discussion, and have to stay on topic. Whereas I think it's a little bit easier to channel that energy when you're out and running on a field, as opposed to sitting around a Harkness table in an English class talking about the Iliad. So they're definitely kind of things that you have to do that are differences and kind of setting the proper tone for the setting, and the environment. And I think it's a little bit easier on the field to be able to channel that energy into positive kind of output than it might be in the classroom, depending on the day, depending on the lesson. If it's like a group discussion or a debate that we're doing that's kind of intentionally structured, that energy is exactly what I want. I want them digging in. I want them engaging and understanding, obviously, like the rules that we have in place. But definitely something that I enjoy. And I think on the field, similarly, it's a little bit easier to get kids from that kind of flat baseline where they're not as energetic and get them up and get them going with a couple of drills at the beginning of practice, than it might be in the classroom where there's not exactly as direct a parallel as those kind of energy giving drills that I'm sure every coach has in their back pocket.
Going back to last season and your last season at CM, it was a very successful year, one of the best the CM's had in recent memory, big wins over conference rivals. Just kind of take me through the start of that season to the end. Did you kind of have a feeling that this group was going to be a little bit special, and just kind of like, what was it like from the beginning of the year to the end, and how'd that season play out?
Yeah, the 2024 class was really special for CM. There were a bunch of guys that were coming from the hockey team that had that experience and had that background and been playoff tested. And them coming in and their season not ending the way that they wanted to in the hockey season was something that left them with kind of that bitter taste in their mouth. So when they came in to the lacrosse season, they were really kind of champing at the bit, ready to go. And then the class was super talented too. They had some really hardworking kids that channeled that effort into development over their 3 years, 4 years, 3 years that I was there, one with Coach Cal. But it was a great group that they were leaders. They saw some of the mistakes that we made the years prior. They saw some of the things that didn't work. They worked through some of the bad habits that we might have had, and developed really great habits over the 4 years that they were at the school. And we had great leaders and great players. So it was a special year for us. And the guys got to know each other really well. They loved playing together on the field every day. We had kids that weren't necessarily as high profile coming into the season have great years. Our faceoff guy, Declan Mullen, wound up being one of the stronger kids in the conference, and he wasn't necessarily a guy that most people would have picked at the beginning of the year. One of our attackmen, Sean McCarthy, who's going to Conn College, had a fantastic senior year. He lit it up the entire time, playing against some kids that on paper or from their college commitments were better players. So guys stepped up. They knew that they had a goal they wanted to accomplish, and we had a ton of talent on that team, and they still will this year. But the guys really kind of took it by the reins and drove their season. So I'm happy that I got to channel that energy and that effort. But it was really that class that earned the record that they did.
Just wrote McCarthy up actually this week on lastjournal.com.
How about that?
Check that out. They want me to plug more, so I'm plugging more. Coach, you're going into a situation that you're a place you're familiar with. I assume you're familiar with all the players and you've already met them and things like that. You're also going into the ISL, which is a gauntlet, the likes of which most people probably don't understand in terms of sheer talent and vastness. Like the number of ISL teams and the number of competitive ISL teams is, I think, post-COVID taken a different turn than when you played. Is that a fair statement to you?
Definitely. I think the nature of high school athletics have changed substantially in the last 10 years, where a lot of that talent has been consolidated in Massachusetts in the ISL and in New England in prep schools, which is a different trend that we can talk about or not. But it's definitely something I'm excited for. I think it's similar to the NESCAC in some ways, where the league is just so strong all the way across the board. But it does seem like in recent years, it's just taken a step up. One of the cool things that is great for the program, great for the kids, and great for me is that Jeff Cohane is still on the staff. James Cohane, his brother, is still helping out with everything. And we have that experience and a great senior class that I feel extremely lucky to kind of be walking into in my first year, where we have a depth of talent and just really high character kids that I think will be able to bridge that transition and not take a step back in a transition year. But in terms of the ISL, yeah, it's a super competitive league. I coach with a lot of the coaches through 3D and know a lot of the guys already. But I know that they're super hardworking guys and that their teams are going to be really well coached. And it's something that I'm really excited to step into. It's kind of been the goal, and definitely looking forward to leaning on my assistant coach, Jeff, who is the man and who coached me and who has a ton of experience. And that way, I think that'll kind of carry whatever I may be kind of lacking coming in. I'll be able to learn from him pretty quickly, I hope. And I think we'll be able to put a really good team on the field again this year because we return a ton of talent.
When you were a player at Middlesex to we're now going back to the coach, there's a big difference now. You have playoffs, which I think is a huge plus. I always found it weird that prep schools just didn't have playoffs. I feel like you'd miss that. My question is to you is, when you were playing at Middlesex, did you feel a sense of like you wanted like more than just the season and that was it? Did you have the drive that you missed that playoff atmosphere and you looking forward to getting that again once going back to Middlesex as a coach?
Yeah, absolutely. I was pumped just to hear about it when they made the change, and that there was I remember texting some of my friends from Middlesex and just being like, hey, they finally did it, because it was something that we always wanted when we were there. It is a little bit different with the scheduling now. You don't play every team every year, which again, I don't know the ins and outs of yet. I'm actually sitting down with one of our people in the athletic department next week to kind of run through all the scheduling stuff. But it's definitely something that I'm looking forward to. It creates an awesome environment. Being able to watch some of the kind of championship weekend games last year, once I knew I had the position, was a really cool experience. And yeah, I mean, I think anybody that's watched some of those games, you get a super high level of lacrosse. You get a ton of people coming out to them. I think it's great for the game. And yeah, I mean, who doesn't love playoffs?
I don't know how else to say this. Owen Crane is so sick. He is such an awesome player to watch. And you're going into his final season is going to be your first season there. He's the kind of player that I always say is like a next level player, and he defies body type and player type in the way that he can get to the middle, get his shot off, create for other people. He's played midfield, he's played attack. I guess like my question is like, how are you going to deploy a weapon like that? Because in the ISL, you know, we have a lot of great defensemen, defensive schemes, a lot of excellent goalies. How do you deploy him? Because you could use him in a lot of ways. You could have him be the tip of the spear guy, final shot guy, creative guy, create from the wing, create from the top, create from behind. Like, how do you utilize a player like that to get the most out of him for your team?
Yeah, I think it'll be kind of part of the scouting piece and seeing what other teams are doing with their defenses and what we can kind of plan for in that. Owen is, like you said, super versatile, unbelievable athlete, really good lacrosse player. I'm extremely excited to coach him. He set the points record at Middlesex as a sophomore, I think. So being able to single season, being able to coach a kid like that is something I'm really excited for. But it'll really depend on kind of the day, the game, and what we prep going into him. So with him being a super versatile guy, I don't know, like getting shut off or getting kind of closed out at X like he did last game of the last year. Like, how do we start to put him in positions to have success? How do we pick for him? How do we kind of play with him both on ball and off ball? I think a lot of it will come into practice and prep. So when we get to the games, it'll kind of depend on what we're seeing from other teams' defensive schemes and how we want to adjust from there, but kind of preaching those systems in practice and kind of setting up those tenets of our offense so we can be able to make adjustments on the fly pretty consistently to open up whatever part of the field we want to exploit or whatever kind of weakness in their defense that we see. Because I think Owen is a kid, like you said, that has a whole lot of strengths. So he's not somebody that we have to necessarily plan for any major deficiencies in his games. It's more about kind of seeing what other teams are offering, seeing how we can best leverage him to open up things, because he's also a great feeder, and being able to have him possibly be that ball carrying force and open things up is something that will be really hard to kind of game plan against from other teams' defensive perspective. And he's just a kid that already, from what I've seen, he joined the football team 2 weeks into the season this year and wound up starting at defensive back. And in our bowl game, he had a 46-yard field goal first year he played. So he's a kid that, yeah, crazy. He's a kid that is really just like, he's a coach's dream. You get to do a ton with him. And we have so many kids around him too, and especially in this class that have played with him for years, that they open up his game, he opens up their game. They've developed that kind of symbiotic relationship that he's obviously kind of a high profile kid from a social media perspective, certainly not at school. He's a very low key dude and super humble. And that was one of the things that I was kind of wondering when I was coming into the school is what's Owen Cran going to be like, because you hear the name a lot. And he's just a nice, easygoing kid. So he's not selfish. He's not a me guy. He's somebody that shares the ball. And that's going to open up a ton for our offense.
Yeah. When he, not that you have to comment on this, but when he flipped to Virginia as an ACC player, I got a couple texts like, have you seen this kid? I'm like, hold on 1 second. And I looked through all the stuff I've written and I just sent link to this person. And they were like, so you like him? And I'm like, very much so. Yes. Very excellent player. Very awesome. I think the only other guy I've talked about or people have asked me about as much is probably Jimmy Ayers. And now he's going to be a sophomore at Hop. And, I'm sure he probably would give you nightmares if you were coaching against him. Anyone would. But I always think it's interesting to talk to newer coaches in the ISL because it's a league that's, I don't know, this is also a not delicate way to put this. It's getting younger with the coaching staff. I think you have younger coaches coming in and bringing a different energy to it and, being involved in the prep scene after kind of maybe not proving themselves at another league, but like you're getting more younger coaches to come in and take over teams. What has your experience been in that transition, more so from taking the job to now? Because I think that's interesting because you were doing soccer as well at CM. So, now you're but you are a teacher and a lacrosse coach, and you get to focus on this thing a little bit more. How has that been for you since the transition?
Yeah, it's been great. I did, just as a quick shout out, I coached the girls varsity soccer team as an assistant as well. So I want to plug them for a second. Awesome experience, but definitely nice being able to kind of focus in and have a little bit more kind of time just with this position to be able to focus in on lacrosse really specifically and be able to put my energy into something that I love, not only from the game perspective, but from the specific program. Like Middlesex lacrosse was something that made me the person I am today in a lot of ways. And so being able to kind of key in on that and put my best foot forward, especially at a point in my life where I don't have a lot of necessarily not distractions, be an indelicate way to put it, but I don't have kids. And that's a huge time commitment. And so that's something that I'm really kind of excited to be able to put a lot of my time into this. And then just from the perspective of the ISL and younger coaches kind of coming in, we have, I think, a really diverse coach group. I don't know everybody super well yet. But I think it's great in that I and a lot of the other guys were coached by or kind of know really well some of the longtime coaches like Herder and Bidstrup, who I think kind of set a great tenor for the league and a collegiality in that, where I think that as competitive as the ISL is, I hope that it's still a league where the coaches get along as well as I got to see Ned Herder and Bidstrup get along, despite being like a massive rivalry and Middlesex Cubs always being a super fun game. Those guys loved each other and were so respectful towards each other. And that's something that I think we should all aspire towards and that we will, I hope, kind of be able to keep the integrity of the league despite the kind of increasing level of talent and competitiveness. I think it's always going to be a special league because hopefully we're all kind of on the same page about being good guys on the sideline, setting the right example, being good parts of the community, both lacrosse and school wise. So I think that that's something that, knowing a lot of the guys, I know that they are really, really good guys and really good coaches. So I think that we have a great foundation to be able to kind of build those relationships over time. I know that I'm certainly going to be at Middlesex for a very long time. I know that some other leagues, some other schools have a lot of turnover in their coaches. So I'm looking forward to kind of building those relationships and having those great competitive kind of seasons build up over time, and rivalries are one of the most fun things in sports. I know we already have a lot of those kind of established within the ISL, and looking forward to kind of being a part of that again.
Hey, it's Bobby Moran, Director of Athletics at Thayer Academy. You know what? Experience matters, and Thayer Academy's professional coaching staff understands how to work with each student athlete to help them succeed. Our coaches and faculty are committed to ensuring both 5th to 12th graders feel known, connected, and prepared. This is Thayer's secret sauce, nurturing each student to reach their full potential. Here, success is truly a team sport. Are you ready for your child to take the next step? See what Thayer has to offer at thayer.org. That's THAYER.org.
Are you serious about playing your sport in college? Do you need a flexible education that allows you to maintain your practice and competition schedules while also preparing you to succeed at the next level? You should check out the University of Nebraska High School. UNHS is accredited and offers more than 100 online courses, including NCAA-approved courses to protect your academic eligibility. Students could earn a UNHS diploma or take a single course for transfer credit. Courses are college prep, self-paced, and available 24/7, 365. Enroll anytime and take up to a year to complete a course. Visit highschool.nebraska.edu today.
Going back to talking about the utilization of Owen Cran and how it's going to change week to week, game to game, what's your overall philosophy on changing so much of your game plan for each given opponent and saying, oh, this matchup's really beneficial for us, the next week this is beneficial, and changing up week to week, as opposed to a certain philosophy if you don't want to get too different from what you like to do overall? And how do you kind of balance those two things of both, hey, on this matchup, I like this for this game, but overall we do X, Y, Z, and we want to stay the same kind of lacrosse team heading into playoffs to make sure we have the best continuity. What's your kind of philosophy like that, Ben, and how do you handle that in certain times when you see something that could be beneficial in the short run, but maybe isn't what you typically do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about teaching principles and being able to kind of work within something that you're doing on a consistent day-to-day basis, where you're not actually necessarily changing what you do. Maybe you're giving it a different read. Maybe you're seeing something where when you're practicing the same thing every day, like we will be, I think that kind of allows you to be mobile on the field and make those decisions, where I don't think we're going to be drastically changing what we do every single game to game. That would be tough in terms of installation and prep and just how much time the guys spend academically. Like, we're not going to be putting 6 hours a day into lacrosse like maybe colleges are or something like that. So I think that having a core identity as a team is absolutely massively important. And you build that over the first part of the season, preseason, and kind of identify what are the things that we're really good at. And then when you have that foundation of what you know you can do, being able to add wrinkles, add kind of those little principles to your offense that allow you to open up and gain leverage offensively and defensively. I think that's how you're able to make those on the fly adjustments and kind of react to what other teams are doing. Obviously, if you don't have to, and you're able to dictate at all times as an offense and as a defense, you're going to be in really good shape. But realistically, with the ISL and the level of the coaches and the players that are in it, I don't know that any team has ever been able to say, hey, we're dictating what's happening on the field for an entire season, every single game. Adjustments have to happen. You have to be kind of mobile and able to put those things in practice. But if you don't have a core identity as a team, you're not gonna be great. So totally agree with you on that front.
We're going to get back to Middlesex in a second. I just realized you played in one of the best games I've ever seen in my life. You didn't come out on the winning side. Do you want to guess what game I'm talking about? You know what it is, don't you?
I hope it's not what you're going with. Was it 2018?
No.
What was it?
17.
17? Yeah. What game? Was it Bates?
No.
Which one?
Wesleyan.
Yeah.
I was there for this. It was my first, and I only remember this because I was talking to Owen before we started, that someone asked me what the best atmosphere I've been to at a Division III game was. And I was like, well, have you ever been to the Birdcage?
Birdcage is awesome.
And he's like, what's that? And I was like, it's kind of like it's like cut out, and it looks like a giant just placed concrete blocks around a field, a huge hill that you can fall down if you're on the sideline wrong, and one stand. And there's one way in and there's one way out. And I watched Tufts Wesleyan in 2017 from the stands because there's no press box, right? So I'm in the stands surrounded, and I got there early and I'm sitting in like the top of it so I can see the most of the field. And people, I was like, oh, I don't think people are coming to this game. 5 minutes before anything starts, rush of people fill the entire stand, fill the entire sideline on one side and on the other side. And this game, I didn't realize how much, and this is my opinion, I'm not saying it's fact, these two teams hated each other, and it was awesome. Like, I believe that's the game that ended on a rusty gate from Wesleyan short stick D-Mitty, like throwing it on the sideline and somehow getting it. And it was, you've never seen a game end like that and an entire fan base explode. And there was some post-game stuff we don't have to get into, but playing in the NESCAC, I think, is so analogous, you mentioned it earlier, to playing in the ISL, where rivalries are a huge part of the draw, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I know that we're all, I'm not saying that the flag planting thing is good. I didn't think that's terrible. I think that's a disgrace to sports. But there's something to be said for teams that are just like, I'm going to take you out. This is our time. We're going to take you out. And either it works or it doesn't. In your memory, you mentioned a couple games before I mentioned this one. What game was like that for you as a player at Tufts?
Yeah, probably the Wesleyan games. They had a really incredible team, 2017, 2018. And I remember like Rusty Gate from the D-mid, kid dodging down the lefty alley pretty well. Yep. And like a lot of memories from those games. We were on the right end of a lot of them as well. But there was definitely that rivalry that built up, and they kind of gamed their system towards our offense and forced us to adjust. In 2017, we weren't really able to do that. So hats off to those guys, super well coached team. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what makes the game so fun. That's what keeps you coming back. That's what kind of fires you up in the off season to be able to start preparing and continue to prepare to get the better of that matchup the next year. And I think that the great thing about the ISL and like having kids that can't PG, that's not acceptable. You don't have kids that are just one and done. So that kind of feeling that boils up inside you and makes you really want to play the game. Both for your teammates and for the guys to your left and right, but also against the guys that you're playing against. I don't think there's anything wrong with a little bit of showing your love to your teammates by working as hard as you can against another group. I think that's something that is really special. So I definitely remember a lot of great memories from Tufts. Obviously, we didn't kind of finish the mission there for our class, but cool to see those guys get it done this past spring. But definitely, those memories that you build and putting so much of your life into the game, especially in college and high school, obviously you've got a lot going on, but as you do in college, but just having that care, that factor of really putting everything into it is special, and something that a lot of guys don't get after high school. College sports are an absolute blessing, and the guys that are lucky enough to play, they get another 4 years of that. But it's something that for a lot of kids that are really good players, even in the ISL, they're not necessarily going on to play Division I or Division III or D2 kind of college lacrosse. So that could be the end for them. Got some incredible hockey players, again, that are guys that go on and play a couple of years of juniors and wind up making their way into college hockey, but might be better lacrosse players sometimes. So that might be the last time they suit up. So a lot of guys that care a ton about the sports that they play. And especially in high school, it's the last time you'll ever be able to suit up for Middlesex, last time you'll ever be able to suit up for whoever. So it's definitely a special experience.
I hate to break it to everyone listening, that rivalry is way back on, especially after last season. And also Jack Raba and CK Giancola are both back for Wesleyan. So that's going to be wild. It's going to be fun. I love that game. It's one of my favorite rivalry games. When you were playing at Middlesex, who was your rival? And is that the same rival in the ISL today?
Yeah, definitely. I want to say Govs, like there were a lot of teams that, I don't know, you wind up, especially as like a 14 to 17 or 18-year-old kid, not liking as much. And I think there are a few teams that kind of fall under that bracket for me when I was in high school. So while I love all the coaches in the league, those animosities stay. Like you have your prejudices that you develop when you're kind of in high school against other teams, and that little bit of hatred or whatever you want to call it towards them, that I'm sure when I see guys in that jersey again, it's going to feel the same way in a lot of ways. So I think that's something that's a fun part of sports. But just kind of going off of that, one thing that I've always been super proud of Middlesex for, and the guys that both I got to see last year and that I played with, is that kind of that rivalry, that sense of I don't know, just having a little bit more energy for some games is something that really, I think we've done a great job at keeping it about us, and not necessarily letting that bleed over into conduct that's kind of unnecessary or unbecoming or unacceptable. And that sportsmanship piece is always something that Ned Herder and Doug Worthen always preached to such a high degree, where that was the most important thing, that you're playing the game the right way, and that you're loving playing it. So I think that's something that I'll continue to preach, and I love that animosity, that little bit of juice that kind of gets a game going, but making sure that you're understanding the situation and that it is a game that you very desperately want to win, but that it is something that you got to represent yourself the right way, and that our guys, I think, definitely have done that in the past and will continue to do that as we move forward with the program.
Who's that for Westwood on? You don't sit there and think like you don't know off the top of your head. I know
I'm
you know.
Say I love Coach Isif. He's a great colleague. Every time I step on that field, I want to burn that town to the goddamn ground. We talked about it's good when teams hate each other. It's fun and all this stuff. We mentioned similar to the LSAB game that happened a couple years ago. That was so fun. The MIA has its no shortage of bulletin board material. It's there all the time. It's stuff that we've talked about with certain coaches. Just because it's so vast, there's so many things that happen, so many rivalries in the ISL. Granted, you've only been there as coach for a couple of months now, but do you find it's a much more kind of like closer community, and there's that less kind of like, oh, this town over here, like we don't like it, where yes, that kind of cordial nature still exists, but then there's still the kind of like the rivalries guy, like, but overall, because it's 16 teams as opposed to however many are in the MIA, like 150, 200, like just are those relationships pretty close and not kind of the same as it was when you were back in the MIAA?
I don't know yet. Like I haven't gotten to kind of have those games from a coach's perspective. I haven't really met like even all the coaches in the league yet. So I think that I'm sure there's some collegiality, and I'm sure there's a bit of animosity as well that's built up over the years, because these guys, the coaches, put a ton into it, and if you're putting that much into it and somebody just keeps beating you, I think we all know how that can feel, and I'm sure that kind of builds up over time, and you have your rivalries that develop, and I'm sure that spills over a little bit more than it should sometimes. And I don't think that there's a lot that a lot of guys can do about that. Human nature is going to remain. And I think that that's a fun part of sports too. So as much as we want to be collegial, I think that winning is going to be the thing that drives us the most for a lot of coaches. And I think having fun, and the best way to have fun as a team and as a coach is to win games. So it's definitely a focus. It's something that we all love, all want to do. But I'm sure it bleeds over a bit.
Yeah, my first year at Hopkinton, we played Kearsarge, and I didn't go to school at Hopkinton. I lived in Hopkinton for 2 years, but my parents were divorced. And I still went to John Stark, and I hate Kearsarge. I hate them so much. We were on the bus and we entered Kearsarge, and it was like a ghost went through me, but it was a ghost of rage. And I balled my fists up, and the kids are like, what's happening? What's going on? And we walk out, we're on the field, we're warming up, and I'm walking around doing my thing in our stretching lines, and I'm like picking up grass and like throwing it. And the kids are like, and I'm not talking. I'm just furious the whole time. And we get in the huddle, and the kids are just like, all right. And I'm usually the one to do the speech. And I was like, my lacrosse career ended here in high school. I hate this team. let's go. And everyone's just like, whoa, what just happened? And I only did that one other time, but I remember afterwards, my captain came up to me. He's like, hey, I know you hate it here, but like, they're just another team to us. Like, we hate this school. And I was like, got it. Okay, that's my adjustment. Got it. Okay, we're turning the adjustment up. So I'm like kind of jealous that you guys get to coach at the school you went to. And you get to like have all those feelings be real, whereas mine is not real. That was just like a personal trauma coming to surface. But like all of your stuff is real, and I think that's so awesome. And we have coaches on here that coach at their alma mater, and I always ask them this question, and they always kind of like blow it off, right? Like, what's it like? How's, what's that? Because I can't imagine what it'd be like to coach at Stark again. And because I did a little bit, I helped when I came back from college, but I wasn't coaching. I can't imagine what it would feel like still. And this is probably because I hold on to everything and take everything personally. But that energy is so real. And you kind of spoke to it when I could see your face flush when I brought up the Wesleyan game. and I know that was brutal of me. I apologize for that, but it was a great podcast. That kind of emotional pull to do your best for the place that means so much to you, I think is so real and palatable and palpable to everybody that has been through it. And I think when I started coaching, I've talked about this a lot. I was very bad at processing failure, right? Like I wasn't good at it. It came out wrong. I channeled it wrong. And I'm always curious how coaches that have a personal connection to the place they coach deal with that, and if it's different. And most coaches say no, but like, please be the first one to say yes. That would really make the podcast. But if not, like, just kind of explain your thought process on that.
Yeah. So just like processing failure at the school you went to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, inevitably we're going to lose games at some point. Hopefully not this year, hopefully not in the future. But like failure to me wouldn't necessarily be losing a couple of games. That
Sure.
would be the guys not representing the school and the program well. Like we play on Herter Field. And just the fact that we do, and that it was Herter Field when Ned Herter was coaching. Legend, is something that kind of failure for me would be guys kind of disrespecting the legacy that he's left. And that would hit for me if I were the coach that kind of saw the program and kids on the field start to act in a way that wasn't becoming of the school and kind of what we've always preached at Middlesex Lacrosse. That would be a failure. And I think that like it'll definitely sting. And there's that piece of pride that's in you when you're losing games. That just hurts because it comes down to, hey, I didn't do a good enough job as a coach. I didn't prepare the guys well enough. That processing failure, I think it's just a little bit more elevated when you're at a place that you really love. And Middlesex is a place that I care deeply about. The lacrosse program is something that I love and I'm looking forward to kind of leading. So if I'm not doing my job well enough, that's something that's definitely going to motivate me and kind of drive me to make sure that that's not going to happen again. So hopefully we don't find too many of those instances where we're not living up to the name. But I'm looking forward to that challenge for sure.
Just one of my closing thoughts is new school, looking to maybe change things up again. I think you should bring back the Tufts looks. Looking at your profile earlier, I think that's a good look you should bring to the new school. I just think day one, first game, just kind of show up with that look. For those who don't know, he had a great mullet and a handlebar mustache. I think that should be on the sidelines for every single Middlesex game. I had to bring that up when I was looking at that earlier. I was like, that's
a comment I've gotten, I think, at the beginning of every year from kids that I've either taught or coached. Like, hey guys, you got to bring this back. And thinking as a first year teacher at my old job, my first year I was at Moses Brown actually. Coming in my first year with a handlebar mustache and a mullet might have been a challenge to my ability to maintain a classroom. So maybe down the road, kind of getting back into Movember, that was something that I absolutely loved. I still contribute to it, but having the fundraising page and doing that throughout college and putting kind of your best foot forward there was what I always say that picture's from. Realistically, that picture wasn't taken in November, and that I did have that handlebar mustache for a little bit longer than I usually let on. But maybe down the road, we'll see. Definitely, if we put a good effort in for fundraising for Movember, plug. That's something that I will, I'll bring back at some point. Not the mullet. I don't know that I can support that anymore. But the handlebar mustache, I think I could bring back at some point.
The internet never forgets.
No.
I did a Movember once, and it is on my Instagram, and I think about deleting it every day. I haven't done it yet. The kids love it. They love every embarrassing photo of me that's ever been taken, and there's been a lot. So I definitely relate to that. Coach, just want to thank you so much for joining us. We're going to leave it at that, and I'm just excited to see ISL stuff. Our ISL preview is one of our, kind of labors of love here at NELJ. It's really one of our cornerstones, and I really enjoy writing it. And want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for listening to New England Lacrosse Journal's Chase and Goal podcast. For Owen Hart, I'm Kyle Devitt. We'll see you next time.